testing for hendrovirus in humans, there are a couple of people who ask the question, why does it take so long to establish whether or not a human exposed to a horse that's got hendrovirus then has that virus? Can you explain the procedure that goes on there?
Yes, it's one of those things where the perception is that you have the test, and the test is for testing to see whether you have hendrovirus or not. And I guess I'd use an analogy in the health industry. I'm sure everybody in the room is up to date with their tetanus injections. Often if you get a scratch or an injury, you go to see your local doctor or local hospital, and they say, oh, you need a tetanus shot before you go home. You might get some stitches, have the wound cleaned, but you get the tetanus shot. And certainly the perception is that the tetanus shot is preventing you from getting tetanus from the wound that you have just suffered. Nothing could be further from reality. In fact, the tetanus shot is really being done as a preventive strategy. So it's an opportunistic immunisation to stop you getting tetanus next time you get a scratch. But it won't assist with the particular injury that you've got at that time. So I guess the reason I mention that is it's the perception that you have an immunisation and that's going to protect you from the situation you find yourself in. It's very similar, although somewhat different in terms of this being an investigation rather than a treatment, with the screening that we do. And in terms of the testing, there are probably two components to that. There's a testing process that we do for people who have low or moderate exposure, so those people who are very unlikely to develop an illness. And in that regard, there's a test done at early on and then at 3 weeks and 6 weeks. The early test is done to get a baseline so that we know whether there are any unique features of that particular person that may cause what we would call a false positive test down the track, so that we know what the baseline is as we move forward, and we can certainly better understand anybody whose serology changes. Any person who is, however, exposed and who has a high level of exposure or requires specialist care, that type of care is undertaken rapidly. With all of the events that occur, we work very closely with the other government departments and Biosecurity Queensland, and have public health medical officers available to meet with and counsel those people who are involved. Public health medical officers who are doctors who have been trained in this particular area, and they're aware of the stratification process. They're also able to provide advice about whether you do need to see your local doctor or have the serology tests undertaken. And those tests then allow us to track the person over time and really are an exclusion. So they allow us to say, no, this person didn't develop an illness. I think in recent times there have been about 68 contacts with this recent, or 68 contacts with the 2011 events that have occurred. 66 or 64 of those have come back as being negative in their 3-stage testing process, and I think there are 2 people who are still waiting for their last test. So in terms of our process, we intervene very early to provide medical expert advice on a case-by-case basis, and we do undertake the screening process, which is in place and does take time to come back, but it's really a screening process, and it's a second-level tool that we would use.
Okay. We might now move on to Dusty the dog. There were an enormous